It's biology with Mr. B. Biology with Mr. B. That's me! Hello everyone watching. This is a GCSE revision video on the topic of respiration. So what I've done out on the outline of my title in blue, I've tried to highlight the key bits from this part of the paper on AQA GCSE topic. So we need to appreciate the aerobic reaction, what type of reaction it is, the word equation, where it takes place, the really basic stuff. We then need to look at how the energy released from respiration can be used by living things, and in particular when it comes to the mark schemes and the spec points where that actually flows. We then look at the other type of respiration, anaerobic, and an idea called oxygen debt, which we can link to a couple of other little bits here or there across paper 1. Response to exercise, which links in really nicely with a circulation based topic that's coming up. I'm going to go through a 6-mark idea on this video, which is an idea related to all things energy and how respiration links to basically to energy and why that is so important for exams and how they can link that across a wide range of topics. There's also an idea in this spec on what metabolism is and examples of metabolism. I'll try and show that here and there, but I want to keep to 20 minutes to keep it short and sweet, so I might not be able to get through every little tiny bit. So please make sure you are looking at the spec points and you're looking at my revision guides to make sure that you know every single part of this topic before we have any sort of test or exam on it. Right. Rock and roll. So let's start off with the most important thing. You have to know your word equation. For aerobic respiration, it is glucose plus oxygen. They are the reactants, and they react together to give carbon dioxide and water. Now, firstly, if you've done photosynthesis and revised photosynthesis, you'll notice that this is literally the opposite way round, isn't it? Photosynthesis, where CO2 plus water reacts to give glucose and oxygen. So if you know one, you know the other, because they're just the opposite of each other. So this reaction takes place inside the mitochondria of eukaryotes. You don't need to know this for your spec, but in prokaryotes, because they don't have mitochondria, they actually have all the enzymes for aerobic respiration in their cell membranes, which is quite cool. Now, in photosynthesis, the word equation kind of tells you why it's happening, because in the word equation of photosynthesis, you're producing glucose, which is obviously essential because that's the food for the plant. But in respiration, well, carbon dioxide is a waste product that you excrete when you breathe out. We literally aim to remove it from the body. And water, whilst important, we don't respire to gain water, at least humans don't. We gain water by drinking and eating. So that's not a useful product of respiration. It's more of a byproduct. The useful product is something we can't write down because it's not a chemical. So I'm going to have it in brackets to imply that it is not a chemical and therefore shouldn't be in a chemical word equation. But the useful product is that when you have respiration, it releases energy in the form of heat. It releases energy in the form of heat. So look at some like energy store ideas from physics. Glucose is a chemical energy store. When you break it down in respiration in the presence of oxygen, this is a combustion reaction. Ultimately, fuel plus oxygen gives CO2 plus water. When you break it down, the chemical store gets transferred into heat energy. And that energy is what the cells can use and what the body can use for 3 main important functions. So the three important uses of energy, guys. How we use that energy inside living things. Number one, movement. And if you're an animal, we can be specific and say muscle contraction. You know? So that links really nicely to exercise, doesn't it? Why do you respire more when you exercise? More energy released, so more muscle contraction. Number two, if you're a mammal or a bird, you're going to use that extra heat energy released to maintain your body temperature. But again, it is only mammals and birds that do that because we're the ones that are warm-blooded. All the other animals, they're what we call cold-blooded, and they rely on their environment. They don't use metabolic processes like respiration to maintain body temperature. The third one, and this third one, I'm actually going to just completely redo my slide, redo my little whiteboard for this, because you kind of have to draw it. The third one, the third use of energy is the idea of synthesis. That's a key word. That means is building. Can't spell. Building larger molecules from smaller ones. And these diagrams I'm going to very quickly show you. These are also examples of metabolism. So what sort of big molecules can we build? Well, you could take some amino acids and you could turn them into a protein. So that's synthesis. That is what the ribosome does, isn't it? Protein synthesis. And it requires energy from respiration. We could take molecules of glucose and turn them into a large molecule such as starch or cellulose or glycogen. Remember, starch is that's the energy store in plants, glycogen the energy store in animals, and cellulose a structural carbohydrate that makes up cell walls in plants. And all three of them are just glucose molecules joined together, but like perhaps in a slightly different way. So we can also have, because I'm focusing on food molecules, we can also have the idea of a molecule of glycerol and 3 fatty acids combining together to create a lipid. So lipid synthesis. Even just examples of like conversions where like glucose may get converted into amino acids, or amino acids converted into glucose, or these molecules sort of converting into each other. That's all energetic processes of synthesis because you're building new molecules. So not only is it a use of energy, it's also a really good example of metabolism. Metabolism, by the way, that's the sum of all the chemical reactions inside your body. Do you know what the best example of metabolism is though? It's not a use of energy, but the best example of metabolism is respiration. Respiration reaction is metabolism. It is. It is metabolism. Because it's a chemical reaction, and metabolism is the sum of all your chemical reactions that happen inside your body. Right, so we've got aerobic respiration then in the mitochondria releasing energy. And I did the word equation, so I'll just do the simple equation. Glucose, we should know from photosynthesis, C6H12O6. Oxygen, which is O2. carbon dioxide and water. And again, I know I shouldn't, but in brackets I am going to put, because this is why we respire, plus the release of energy. That's the whole point of it. So that's aerobic respiration. But it's not the only type. Anaerobic respiration is the type of respiration you will use if oxygen isn't readily available. So in humans, imagine your PE teachers make you do like a 60-metre sprint. There isn't enough time to get the oxygen to your cells, to your mitochondria, to react with the glucose. Yet you still need energy. You still need to release some energy for muscle contraction, for movement. So your body will very quickly do anaerobic respiration, which doesn't require oxygen. And that's why when you do like a sprint, I think you probably know the feeling if you've been made through a 400 metres. That's why sometimes you get that pain in your joints, because lactic acid is produced. So anaerobic respiration in animals, like humans, glucose is broken down into lactic acid. You don't need to know your symbol for lactic acid, so woo, one less thing to know, but it does so. And it does release energy. But there are some clear differences between aerobic and anaerobic. I'd like to think the obvious one is that there's no oxygen. That's kind of a deal breaker. Likewise, the obvious difference is you have completely different products. CO2 is produced in aerobic, lactic acid in anaerobic. Water is an aerobic, not an anaerobic, and so on. There's also a difference in the release of energy. Anaerobic respiration releases much less energy per glucose molecule. So you can argue that anaerobic respiration is less efficient at releasing energy than aerobic respiration. To be quite specific about it, it's about 1/16th of the energy released per glucose molecule in anaerobic compared to aerobic. So it is actually quite a big difference. Now, the higher level tasks to do with this idea is what the body does with this poisonous chemical, lactic acid. If it stays in your joints, it will cause muscle fatigue and cramp. It is a toxin after all. So you need to be very, very aware of the two ways, when I mark these exams in the summer, many students for some reason only seem to learn one. But there's two ways that lactic acid can be removed by the body. The one that most people do quite well is the idea of oxygen debt. Because if you take lactic acid and you react it with oxygen, you actually convert it into CO2 and water. It's a combustion reaction: fuel, oxygen, CO2, water. And clearly, CO2 can just be excreted via breathing out, and the water is more than happy to stay in your body, in your bloodstream, isn't it? And how it links this term oxygen debt: the volume of oxygen needed to oxidize, because this is an oxidation reaction. You could say to break down, but I'm going to use the word oxidize all the lactic acid produced is called the oxygen debt. So if you check out like an interview of like a sprinter straight after his 100-meter race or her 100-meter race, and they're in that interview straight away after, and they're panting after doing like 10 seconds of work. They're panting because they've created lactic acid. They had to use anaerobic respiration. There's just simply not enough time in 10 seconds to get oxygen around the body. They've made lactic acid in their joints, and therefore they're panting because they've increased their breathing rate to get more oxygen into their blood, and therefore more oxygen to oxidize the lactic acid and turn it into safe excretory products, CO2 and water. Right then, the second reason. No one ever gets this, like generally, and I don't know why. It's very clearly listed in the spec as, you know, higher tier only, but one single point, therefore it's going to be a single extra point for your marks, isn't it? So number 2, some of the lactic acid is delivered to the liver, the organ, the liver. And the liver actually can convert lactic acid back into glucose, which they can then reuse. Or because it's the liver, I appreciate if you're following this sequence of revision videos, you've not done circulation and ideas around glucose transport yet, but the liver stores glucose as glycogen. So the liver can take the lactic acid in, convert it back to glucose, and then store that glucose as glycogen for when you next need it, which is obviously pretty clever, pretty cool. All right, one final idea before I say my bye-byes, and I thank you for joining me on this video. The response to exercise. When I ask GCSE students, higher tier students who eventually I'm going to expect to get grades 7, 8 and 9, when I ask them at most stages of their GCSE to describe how the body responds to exercise, they're quite good at telling me the heart rate will increase and the breathing rate will increase. In other words, you breathe more and you pump more blood. I'm also just going to have the idea that the breathing depth increases. We don't just breathe more, we don't breathe like faster, we also breathe deeper, don't we, when we exercise, to get more oxygen in, more CO2 out. And in all fairness, if you're asked to describe the response to exercise, yeah, this is what you'd say. But in GCSE exams, to achieve grades 8s and 9s, they will ask you to explain why this happens. And this is what students struggle with, or at least this is what takes a little bit of time to appreciate, because we start to link ideas. So let's see if I can do this. I'm just going to have to rub out this couple bit here, just to give myself a bit more space, but those ideas, those descriptive ideas, will be in this answer. So this would be a 6 mark to explain the body's response to exercise. So I'll start with breathing rate. An increased breathing rate, I'm just going to do that for increased breathing rate, I hope that's okay, just saves me a bit of space, means more oxygen will diffuse into the bloodstream. So I'm emphasising the idea of more there, guys. Really important, because at a normal breathing rate, oxygen diffuses into the bloodstream, but with an increased breathing rate, more of it will. I will also stress with the increased breathing rate, it also means more carbon dioxide will be excreted from the blood. CO2 is a waste product. If it does accumulate, it can be toxic. With an increased heart rate, it means more, again, emphasize the more, blood reaches muscle cells per minute. So I'm putting the idea of rate in there. It's not just more blood, it's more blood like per second, per minute, isn't it? Compared to a normal resting heart rate. And therefore, more oxygen delivered to muscle cells. Therefore, more glucose. Because glucose is in the blood from digestion, oxygen in the bound to the hemoglobin in the red blood cells. The more of them are being delivered to those muscle cells per second. Which means we're going to have more respiration in muscle cells. Which means more energy released by muscle cells. To do more muscle contractions. More. Like Oliver Twist. Please, examiner, have some more. Anyway, really sad puns aside. This is such a crucial 6-mark idea. You can link this idea of energy, more oxygen, more glucose, to digestion and how enzymes work. You can link it to plant nutrients and nitrates and magnesium levels. You can link it to photosynthesis, because more photosynthesis means more glucose and more respiration, more energy released. More energy to synthesize proteins. More protein synthesis, more growth for the plant. More growth means more light, means more glucose, means more respiration, means more energy. It's never ending. And it is a fantastic paper one link. And as you progress throughout these little videos, I'm going to keep doing more and more which link to these ideas. So when you see the next one, circulation video, this idea is going to be there again. When I do my plant nutrients from the triple groups, this idea is going to be there again. And it's the 6-mark idea that seems to come up so far every year in paper one. Right, so thank you very, 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 very much for watching this. Absolute legends. So be good, take care, see you again soon. Bye bye.